Happy World Environment Day, everyone. In preparing for this, I wasn't exactly sure how to go about it, so I've just decided to give quite a personal account of how my career has developed to date. And then I've just captured some key lessons learned, which you might take as tips for career development. They appear on my slides rather than being something that I'm going to specifically talk about. So mine's broadly a story of a wannabe hippie who wanted to make a difference, kind of lost his way a little bit, hurt his back landscaping, retrained, landed a great job in a non-government organisation, in a community organisation, and now works for state government. And my current green job is about engaging visitors, encouraging visitors into the national parks. Is that really a green job? Don't visitors bring impacts to national parks? I tell you, quite a lot of my colleagues at national parks and some of the hardcore stakeholders for national parks think I've lost my green credentials in being involved in tourism in national parks. But hopefully by the end of this talk I will have satisfied you that that is another definition of a green job. I think my sort of passion for the environment started when I was a little tot bushwalking in the Blue Mountains with the family. My sort of thirst for environmental adventure continued. I cycled around Tassie when I was 16 and I went and joined a hardcore blockade to save the Franklin River in Tasmania, and in 1983 we were blockading the bulldozers and the federal government won a court case which enabled them to protect that amazing wild river. I came back to Sydney, I finished school, and then I enrolled in a Bachelor of Arts. I'd done so much science at school I was completely sick of it. But it turned out that a Bachelor of Arts wasn't really me. I withdrew after a year and a half, but not before one really important thing had happened. I'd studied Aboriginal performing arts in the School of Linguistics there, and I'd met some amazing Aboriginal people who invited me to their homeland in Arnhem Land. That experience was kind of like a next major part of my education because I had environmental sensibility, and then I got an Aboriginal cultural sensibility from that experience. And little did I know, I was already being shaped to become a candidate for a national parks job. So I'm in Arnhem Land, I have this great experience, and then while I'm away I keep travelling. I travelled around Australia and eventually I ran out of money and I came back and got the first next job I could, and that was landscaping. Now I loved landscaping, but it's backbreaking work, and look at me, I'm tall and thin, what was I thinking, lifting rocks and stuff like that. But I wasn't content just to work in landscaping, I had a thirst for knowledge, and I enrolled at Ryde TAFE and did some fantastic training there. A really holistic view of landscape management, if you like, and I benefited enormously for that, and what it did was caused all my environmental thirst to gel into a real ambition to have a green job. So with a sore back and a yearning to contribute to the bigger picture, I enrolled in external studies here at Macquarie Uni doing environmental science, and with that training underway I was a much better candidate for other jobs, and I got what I thought was a dream job with Greening Australia, the vegetation management community organisation. Now sometimes you have to do a slightly off-track job in order to get the dream job. I was working in their labour market program helping young unemployed people find a career path. And we were training those unemployed people, but really, was I well equipped? I was a content expert, good at plant ID, and I could apply herbicides and I could construct things. But some of these kids came from sort of institutional unemployment. They needed a social worker. I gave it my best shot, but I'm not sure that I was the very best help those people could have got. But what it did was, for 3 years I worked in that labour market program, which put me in the right place at the right time to get a really big breakthrough job for me, and that was to manage Greening Australia's Greening Western Sydney project. Now that project is managing the landscapes of about 2,500 hectares in Western Sydney. Somewhat degraded land, but it has precious jewels of one of the most endangered ecological communities in Australia, the Cumberland Plain woodlands. And so the team, this great team of people that I worked with, we essentially used restoration ecology to recover those values. But we were also totally committed to community engagement, and this is where a huge other part of my learning started to blossom. I was right into engaging the community, but I was a bit of a pointy head. very much a science-trained person, and possibly the reaching out that we did to local community wasn't quite going to work. And I came to discover that. I outgrew Greening Australia eventually. I applied for a job at National Parks, and that job was to manage the Urban Wildlife Renewal Program. Now, I thought, I'm an urban ecologist, I can do this, I'll help people create habitat in their backyard. But the first part of that job was to undertake this massive social research project. And what we were trying to do was find out, how do we engage people in their backyard for urban biodiversity conservation? Listen to my words, urban biodiversity conservation, that's just the talk of a boffin to a lot of people, and biodiversity conservation is what happens in national parks, not in my backyard. So we came up with a totally new approach to communicating, and that's the Backyard Buddies program. What it's really doing is equating the behaviours that protect urban wildlife with having a nice place to live. And what I learnt is I need to constantly reconceptualise my view of environment, my view of environmental protection, and learn from the other stakeholders that I'm working with. So, I worked on that project for 3 years, and during that time I met a whole bunch of other really motivated environmental educators and connected to them in a network that was then the Sydney Environmental Educators Network. And I think a lot of them were council educators and so forth, and I think we'd all agree, many of us were science trained and we were somewhat under-theorised in environmental education. So the point I want to make there is that it's one thing to be a scientific expert, but you really need to be a social change expert as well, often, to make a big difference in environment. That program still exists. It's managed by a non-government organisation and used by a lot of councils. I eventually took a job in the Education and Community Programs unit at the head office of National Parks. And then notice this, the government often changes what it expects from government agencies. And in the decade of Bob Carr, National Parks were all about protection. He increased the reserve network massively. But since Bob Carr's time as Premier, government is also looking for a return from national parks to the economy. They call it the visitor economy. And that's where my role now, working in encouraging visitors into the park and promoting, I guess, tourism in national parks comes in. The unit had a name change. It's no longer Education and Community Programs, it was Visitor Experiences. I took a sideways step in my career from being at head office to getting closer to the coalface with park managers. So I'm now in Metro branch, but doing roughly the same thing. So now here I am, after being the wannabe hippie, I'm the public sector manager. And your learning never stops. It's not good enough to be a technical expert, either in science or in social change, but I feel I needed to be a capable manager, so I've signed up for some fantastic training, not at this uni, but at the Graduate School of Management at New South Wales Uni, to become a better manager, and I think I'm leading teams and leading a change agenda quite successfully there. So, here I am, my green job. In my view, I'm going to have to add a third thing to my conception of it. Protecting the environment is absolutely important, but it's not enough on its own. It's only part of the equation. Engaging the community and garnering support from the community for that protection outcome is a really important other part of the equation. And then achieving a kind of integration of that outcome with the economy, which is all powerful in some respects, is the final equation. So protection plus community support plus economic outcomes equals conservation in my view. Before I wrap up, I just wanted to give you a quick overview of a couple of of the position titles that you might aspire to just within, not the whole public sector, but just within the bit I know best. National Parks and Wildlife Service. You would have heard of the Park Ranger. Well, just briefly, the Park Ranger, it may surprise you to know, is an office-based job pretty much, doing park planning and issuing licences for activities that take place in parks. They report to area and regional managers who are just like Uber Rangers, who've gone up the ranks. The work in the park and the uniform you most often see when you go into a park is actually the field force, field officers and field supervisors. Those guys and girls do everything from cleaning barbies and bunnies to maintaining tracks and building tracks, doing weed control, protecting threatened species. As well as those field officers, there's specialists who specialise in pest management, fire management, historic heritage management, and then there are Aboriginal sites officers, and the list goes on. So that's the field team. But a big, sophisticated, successful parks agency anywhere in the world now also has a really big head office. And you'll often see a designation in the newspaper ad or online of project officer, and they can be doing very diverse things. Signing up conservation agreements with farmers to protect bushland on their property, a wildlife licensing officer who's issuing licences to people who keep native animals, reptiles, etc., or issuing licences to farmers who need to cull, for example, kangaroos to protect their crops. There are people who are just good old-fashioned project managers, managing construction of picnic areas and lookouts and so forth, or IT projects like building databases to store environmental information. Scientific officers doing biodiversity surveys, terrestrial and aquatic, or maybe measuring water quality. Interestingly, there's a growing sort of number of people with marketing and communication skills in national parks. I've said we need to market the park's experience to people to bring them into the park, and then you need to communicate to them so that they can have a great experience but also act safely and responsibly in the park. So marketing and communications is a burgeoning area in national parks. We've got real estate type people. There's a lot of properties in national parks, buildings occupied perhaps by cafes and restaurants. They all have to be managed as leases. So we've got the White Shoe Brigade in national parks as well. And then there's environmental planners who, if you like, set the overall directions for how parcels of land are going to be managed and contribute to both conservation and to visitor experiences. So I just wanted to give you a quick overview of some positions and wish you happy World Environment Day. Thanks.